Josh Kroenke, Michael Malone, and Calvin Booth walk into a press conference. No one got into a fist fight or anything, but yeah, there's probably still going to be a little bit of disconnect. Will it be all right or will it not be? Plus, I'm going to bust some myths that's been making the rounds about what happened to the Nuggets. That and more on Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for making this part of your day. I genuinely appreciate each and every single one of you choosing to spend some portion of your day listening to our show. We appreciate you guys being along for the ride through the Nuggets championship last season, through training camp, ring night, how incredible that was, all the incredible moments throughout the season, and even through the disappointment of the Nuggets loss in the second round to the Minnesota Timberwolves. On today's show, we're going to talk about how Josh Kroenke, Calvin Booth, and Michael Malone were at the press conferences today. We'll talk about their comments. I have thoughts on those. We're going to comment about how the disconnect will continue, about how it's probably not as bad as the Ringer made it out to be. And I'm going to do some myth busting because there's some nonsense that's been making the rounds that I feel pretty strongly about. So we'll get to all that and more on today's show. Glad to have you with us. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network. Let's start right here. Josh Kroenke, Calvin Booth, and Michael Malone met with the media on Thursday. I wasn't able to make it down there. I have these press conferences are scheduled like 24 hours before. And by that time, my calendar is already full with podcasts and live shows and stuff for the gig. And so I wasn't able to make it, but I will go ahead and tell you, like, I have watched the clips. And so I did have the same kind of takeaways most did. We'll kind of get into some of those comments here. First off, there's the big article from the Ringer about the disconnect between Calvin Booth and Michael Malone. And I don't think there's any sort of secret that there's going to be tension. I like the fact that they admitted as much in the presser on Thursday. There was an open conversation about that both Malone and Booth acknowledged that they essentially have different jobs, that Booth's job is to look for the long term. He has to try and build a roster sustainably over several years and do so within the constraints of whatever the ownership group is comfortable paying, as also within regards to the second luxury tax, which restricts the ability to add certain things to the team. So he has to have that kind of a view. Michael Malone is judged on wins and losses. Period. End dot. And end of sentence. His job is to win the games. And you could say, like, well, no, his job is to win the championship. That's true. So if they had not gotten the 2 seed and they had rested and they had lost because they didn't have home court, then it would be, why didn't you win more in the regular season? Now, that doesn't mean that they needed to take the approach that they did. I've been very upfront about that. But that's going to be a constant kind of tension point. I'm going to maintain, and I'll talk about this later, about how there's this myth that Malone was behind them going for the 1 seed, which is a complete rewriting of history, but we'll get to that later. Calvin doubled down on the long-term development plan and the rookies in particular. He said, yeah, would have been nice to have some upgrade. Yeah, sure. It would have been nice. He said mostly that the rookies needed seasoning. They need to get in the gym. They need to get in summer league, and they need to come back, and he's still very confident that they'll be successful. I'll talk about that again a little bit later in the myth busting section, but that's Booth's view on it. He did acknowledge, Calvin Booth did, that could they use an upgrade or 1 or 2 of their top 7? Sure. If possible, they'll look for those opportunities. That might be something that they do. If they feel there's an upgrade, then they'll look at those going forward. And maybe that's an opportunity if they think that they can get an upgrade on KCP that's cheaper, that avoids that tax or limits that second luxury tax, then they'll definitely look for those kind of opportunities. But he did not rule out re-signing KCP because they've had the best starting 5 in basketball, and they'll definitely look at those opportunities. Josh Kroenke did mention that when you have Nikola Jokic, when Nikola Jokic is on your roster, you're going for it. We have the best player in the world, and we have a responsibility to him to try and go for it. So that's really good to hear from that perspective. At the same time, this was another quote that was given from Josh Kroenke. I think one important footnote about this group that we have down in the Nuggets locker room is the core of this team was assembled under a different CBA, and we drafted and we developed and we built this team under a different set of rules. Those rules have kind of changed on the fly. Last summer, the luxury tax wasn't quite as pertinent as it's going to be this summer. There's going to be some concerns in with the new collective bargaining agreement and the new rules that we're going to have to be very aware of, and we're going to have to plan accordingly. They do make it difficult to retool a championship roster on the fly, but that's why we got Calvin. That's a very good quote because it kind of the combination of things from Kroenke suggests that he's like, don't mind paying for it, but we have to be able to see whether or not we're absolutely sure that going into the second luxury tax and being limited in the trades that we can bring on and the veteran minimum signings and all of the restrictions of that second luxury tax are okay if we feel good enough, because this is a big thing is the front office never wants to feel like they're stuck, which is funny because most front offices also never want to make a move out of desperation, but they want to at least have the option to make desperation moves if it comes to that. And so that I think is more of what he's talking about here. Now, you have to do the thing. You have to actually pay for it. But I will say that in my experience in Denver covering the team for 12 years now, my experience has been that the Nuggets front office, the ownership group, has been totally willing to pay for players. Roster they're willing to put money into. It's everything else that some members of the ownership group, not necessarily Josh, tend to take a very critical eye towards, and that trickles down through all of these kind of things. So this is all to say that it's good to hear that ownership wants to spend and wants to compete around Nikola Jokic. What you didn't want to hear is like, well, we paid for a championship roster and we didn't win one, so now we're going to have to reevaluate that. Like, that's good. That said, you're never really going to hear an ownership group being like, yeah, we're going to duck the tax because we don't want to pay. Like, nobody's ever going to say that because that's a sure way to kill off your season ticket renewals. Malone admitted very much so that he wore out the players. He said, on the one hand, we got the 2 seed. On the other hand, I'm watching our players in game 7 in the second half, and our guys look dead tired, Malone lamented. They did, and I think you guys probably saw the same thing. So did I run our players into the ground? I'm sure that's definitely part of it. Much was asked of Jamal, KCP, Michael, Aaron, and Nikola especially, and we were not afforded the opportunity like we were last year to rest players down the stretch. He said, we made that choice, and we'll live with it. That's all true. And it's good that Malone was like aware of that. Ryan Blackburn asked a very good question of Malone, kind of asking him to kind of reevaluate things and asking about his perspective. And I'll just say this, that like, I think Malone, in my experience, Malone has come back because I can remember things that Malone did in 15 or in 16 that he was terrible at that he didn't do in 2017. And I remember things in 17 he didn't do in 18. In 18 he didn't do in 19. He is a self-evaluative person. For all of his faults and the level of confidence that Michael Malone coaches with, he also is, I would say, like most coaches, he's got pride. I would also say, though, that he's very self-evaluative. He's self-critical. That doesn't always mean that he's going to criticize him on the things that you might think he should criticize himself on. But he does go back, I think, every year and kind of look at what could I have done better. And I think he is going to go back and be like, man, we just screwed up getting the guys rest. We overplayed our hand. I'll talk about why that happened again after a while. One final note is to talk about Christian Braun, because Calvin Booth did lay the groundwork for the possibility that if KCP doesn't return, that Christian Braun could take over the starting shooting guard role. He said he obviously has the intangibles and physical strength and athleticism and defense, Booth shared on Christian Braun. He has to make the improvements as he has in shooting the ball. I don't know how you could see a player in his second year that's done what he's done and not think he has a chance of starting in the NBA. He's ahead of schedule in that regard. Christian Braun averaged 7 points, 3 boards, 2 assists per game this season. Per 36, it's 13, 7, and 2. The rebounding was phenomenal. That's more than KCP, by the way. KCP averaged 10 points, 2 boards, 2 assists. Do I think that Christian Braun played as well as KCP did this year? Not even in the same universe do I think that is true. Not in the same cosmos, not in the same multiverse of events do I think that Christian Braun was on the level of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope as a starting 2 guard. There is a ways to go. And were they to put Christian Braun in the starting unit, I can guarantee you the Nuggets will win fewer games next season than they did this season. That doesn't mean they have to retain KCP. That's just a thing that they have to kind of manage. All right. On the other side, we're going to do some NBA myth busting. And I'm going to get into a number of topics that I think we got to address, from the bench to the end of the season to how this all thing went out. I want to bust some myths that I think have been making the rounds on social media and various, not just one platform, various platforms. So I'm going to get to that up next here on Locked On Nuggets. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. It's so important for you to be able to get through and get the exact parameters that you want. You can identify the key words in the resumes and CVs that you're wanting in your candidates. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. It's got a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals. That makes it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you can't find anywhere else. LinkedIn does all that while making the process easy and intuitive. Most of the candidates on LinkedIn are also going to have real invested interest in presenting the best of themselves towards themselves in the hiring process, and they'll be active in their careers. You want people invested in their careers for your position, and that's where you can find them on LinkedIn Jobs. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. If you're the owner of a small business, this is so important. These large organizations have so many resources to go through, but if you're hiring for a small business, you usually got to move faster, and that's why LinkedIn's so important. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us and making this part of your day. I appreciate you guys being with us here on a Friday. If you're listening to this on the podcast, Thursday night, if you're joining us on youtube.com/Locked On Nuggets, the best way to support the show. Hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, do me a favor, hit the like button. Just go ahead and boop, boop, just little boopity boop on that like button. Would really appreciate it. Let's do some Nuggets myth busting, and I'm going to start right here. The Nuggets did not lose this season. They did not fail to win the championship because they didn't play the rookies more. The hell is this argument I've been hearing? So I do think it's an interesting question. We can kind of narrow it down. I love the DNVR discussion the other day that was centered around, was it just win game 7, or was it all of the things that led them to be gassed in game 7? Because that really is kind of the question. Is it the root of the problem, or is it that they didn't push through? And I think it's an interesting debate, and I don't think there's right or wrong on it. But one thing I do think that is really weird is this idea of why didn't Julian Strawther play more? And where was Jalen Pickett? Seriously? It is, I don't want to go too far on this, because it's entirely possible that Jalen and Julian and Hunter and those guys develop into great NBA players. I'm not shutting the door on them at all. It is possible that in the right time, in the right sequence, when the moment is right and they have gone through the process, that they come out on the other side and they look like huge contributors. But the mistake is always this thought of, this is what drives me more crazy than anything, because you don't know that they're bad, they have to be good. I think at this point, after Michael Malone has been here for 9 seasons, that it's probably time to give the guy, and he has played Peyton Watson, and he played Christian Brown, and he did play MPJ. He yanked with his minutes to get him to do the things that he needed to do, and guess what? He won a title. He's done those things with young players. You can't play the he doesn't play young guys card. You can't. You know what he doesn't play? He doesn't play he doesn't play bad young guys. That's what he does, which isn't to say that these guys are bad players that will never be anything. But there was no evidence at all from what we have access to that Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, or Hunter Tyson were ready for NBA minutes this season. None. Now, you could say there's no evidence that they weren't. Okay. But guess whose job it is to evaluate those things based off of their practice habits and G League play? The coaching staff and player development staff. And I'm sorry, at some point, we should probably lean towards trusting them. And here's the other thing. If you want rookies to play in the playoffs, you know what you should probably do? You should trade up to get good ones. Not that these guys aren't good, again, but guys that are more oh yeah, no, they can play right now. Because these guys were selected at the end of the first round into the second round. Once you get past 20, The consensus among NBA decision makers is like, yeah, you might find some rotation guys. Nikola Jokic, obviously, what a story. Incredible. I think we can all probably reasonably agree Jokic is one of one and an incredible story that will never be repeated ever. There are guys that make it out of second round and contribute. But you know what those guys also do? They force their ways onto the court. Their coaches are like, we got to play this guy. He's too good. That did not happen. And I don't mean to make it a self-fulfilling prophecy where Malone doesn't play them, so they weren't good enough to play. It's possible they were good enough to play and Malone didn't play them. But I don't know how you watch literally anything and think that. And if you say, well, that's why they needed time, Matt. They needed to be able to get on the floor so they could evaluate it. So this is where we get into the problem of the seeding. And I want to go back to the trade deadline, and I'm going to keep hammering this because apparently we've just rewritten the space-time continuum, and it's bugging me a little bit. After the All-Star break, there was a practice. There's always practice after the All-Star break. Get back in the gym. Everybody's refreshed. Let's get some talk. Okay, they had gone this 3-game losing streak. Malone wanted to end that for sure. But Malone was also asked about what are the priorities for now until the end of the season. And Malone said, got to get everybody healthy. We have to get rested and healthy for the playoffs. I followed that up in the coming days at games pregame, asking like, where's kind of like, what's the sense of balancing the chase for the 1 seed versus this? And Malone reiterated, we got to rest and we've got to be healthy. That's what you wanted to hear from him. Comments from the players started coming out when they went on the winning streak following Jokic's inspirational text message. And I don't want to say that that's like, I'm not like blaming Nikola for sending an inspirational message. It was awesome. Like what a sign of leadership. He got everybody so excited. They were jacked. But the problem is that the NBA season, when I talk about peaking too early, it's more about you have to be able to manage the ebbs and flows because you're going to peak and then you're not going to be as good. And you don't have to time it so that you peak just at the right moment because that's very hard to do. But what you do have to do is you have to make sure you don't burn out all of your fuel. I always talk about like they burn the jets. That's what they did. They cooked after All-Star and played the best basketball of this season. But the problem was, as that started to taper off and fade, they wanted it to continue. And so they kept pushing. And you had games like the Utah game. And you had games like the Toronto game where they had to come back down from 20. And they kept burning because they were like, yeah, like let's keep it going. They didn't need to keep it going. And you could say that's on Malone, that's his job to go in there and be like, guys, we're not doing this. But I have a hard time with that because this is the NBA. And the players have such a strong presence in terms of determining things like that. And the players to a man talked about how they wanted to go for the 1 seed because this team legitimately thought that they could do it both, that they could get the 1 seed and be okay. And then Jamal got banged up. And now everything starts to rattle all the way down the stretch, right? Where Jamal's hurt, so guys are playing more and they're having to take on bigger roles. So they're more tired, but they're still winning. So they're within range. And so they chase it all the way down to the end. Steve says the text didn't work because they never got the 1st seed. That wasn't what it was about, though. Like the text was about let's get ready to win a championship. And the problem was they were just so jacked up about that. And here's the other thing. I'll say this about Malone. It's not like you had to drag him. Not like he was like, come on, guys, we should really rest. The minute that you're like, let's go win games, Malone's like, yes, because he hates losing more than absolutely anything in the world. And that's what makes him a great coach. It's also what makes him a psycho because Malone's never gonna not be worried that he's 1 losing streak away from being fired. That's what the Kings taught him. That's what his entire career and his dad's career and every career in the NBA. All these coaches exist with this constant idea of if you don't win, you get fired. And so he bought into competing and he rode his guys. But if we're going to talk about this idea that the bench could have saved them in the end, it needs to start with whether or not you trust Malone and the coaching staff and the player development staff to make the assertion of whether or not these guys could play. And the assertion this year was no. That doesn't mean they can't play next year. Jalen could have a phenomenal summer league and come in next year and get the backup point guard position. Julian could come in and be like, oh man, Julian's found himself and he's gotten in the gym and he's jacked now. And now he's a great combo backup too. Like, these things are extremely possible. They're very possible to probable. But that wasn't who they were this year. They didn't have the guys. Peyton didn't play in the Wolves series because it was a matchup problem. And that was the right decision because Justin Holiday won his minutes. He had the best on-court plus minus of anybody. And if you want to say, like, okay, I don't trust plus minus, fine. Watch the games and see how much Justin Holiday gave them lifts when they needed it. Peyton Watson not playing was not the reason that the Nuggets lost. Julian Strother not playing was not the reason the Nuggets lost. The reason was more in line with the idea that they probably needed another veteran or two to be able to rebalance this, and they needed to downshift. And those are the things that I think they have to take forward next year. On the other side, I have some more myths that I want to bust. So we'll get to that on the other side here on Locked On Nuggets. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is an online therapy program that can absolutely change your life. It's just really important for you to be able to deal with stuff. And hey, like, look, I deal with fans stressed out over their teams all the time. And it's not like this is the biggest thing in the world that the Nuggets season ended. Doesn't help. It sucks. The Avs season ended. That sucks. And if you just get to feeling like, man, nothing's going right, therapy can help recenter you and help you figure out where your priorities are and help you feel centered in those kind of things. So this stuff doesn't bother you as much. It's just good to have someone that you can talk to that can help you reset those boundaries on yourself to make sure that you feel better. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out the brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. A couple more comments I wanted to get to from the presser too that I want to make sure I mention. Michael Malone, I thought, was really classy in defending Michael Porter Jr. Because Porter Jr. like stood up and told everybody that it was on him, and he was like, "We all lost," which is a very, Avengers Endgame cap. We all lost, Tony, kind of deal. But I appreciate the fact that Malone could have thrown him under the bus, and he didn't. Like, Porter had a bad series. I will go. I'm not going to move off of this. That, guys, if Porter was an issue in all the series last year and was picked on and then had this, then I'd be like, look, you're going to have to re-examine it. I just really don't. And I'm not, look, longtime listeners, not exactly like I've always been the Porter guy, right? And I do have questions. Like, someone went on Twitter today was like, well, the coaching staff didn't let him expand his game. And I'm like, no, like, Porter hasn't come into camp with a good enough game. You have to come into camp and be like, hey, look, I can handle now. Like, look at all these moves that I added off the dribble. And then the coaching staff will be like, damn, we should like trust him with that a little bit more. That hasn't happened. Again, like, what the players bring into the gym is how these coaches assess things. And that's on the players to a certain degree to do. Like, yes, they have development programs, but so much of NBA development is independent. Just something to consider. Sean says, I think Malone had a bad series, to be honest. Continually allowing Murray to switch on the guarding Cat was dumb. Yep. What's funny is, like, there were so many times throughout the regular season where teams would try and test Jamal in post-ups and lose. And it was like, why are you trying Jamal? He's such a good post defender, much the same way that James Harden was. But the problem is just, like, Cat's a different animal. Waka, waka, waka. He's just like so much of a bigger guy, and Jamal just wasn't in a position to be able to do so. Calvin did talk about the calf with Jamal, and I do think that that's relevant. Calvin made mention of the fact that basically, was the conditioning maybe part of the problem with how he came back after the injury or leading to the injuries? Maybe that's something to explore, which is a little bit of a shot, little bit. And I'll just be really honest here. Like, they're heading into a summer where Jamal's going to want a max contract extension. There's drama like on the horizon here. And maybe it doesn't come up. Maybe everybody's just like, look, it's just in our best interest to stay together. And they give him the extension and everything's great. Maybe that's fine. But it's also possible that there's going to be some lingering, like, hey, you need to show us you could stay healthy. Like, that's a thing you're going to have to prove. Because availability is going to be more valuable than ever in the NBA. And Aaron Gordon's extension is on the other side as well. They got a lot of money they got to pay out over the next couple of years. So Hurricane says, there's an 80-20 thing with Porter's ability versus the coaching staff. I think the staff wants him to be an off-ball monster, and that leads to his limited skill set, but that's also probably his best role. Yeah, it's tough, right? Where it's just like, would it have been great if Porter Jr. was like a 3-level scorer? For sure. Has Porter shown an ability to do that? No. Are you ever like, man, Porter's such a great creator with the ball? That is not a thing. And like, he can get better at it. And if he gets better at it, it'll help, you know? He was also asked, and I understand the idea of he was asked to not develop those things, to work on the other stuff. And he did them. And that's why they won a championship, which is, again, why I don't blame Porter as much. I'll say this. I blame guys when they should succeed and they don't, or if their own decisions lead to them not succeeding. I don't blame guys in playoff series for having a bad series, because I've seen so many great players have bad series. Matchups are weird. Jaden McDaniels is a phenomenal all-world, all-NBA defender. He's got nothing for Luka Doncic, because he's a $190 and Luka's all strength. That matchup is a nightmare for Jaden McDaniels, despite how good of a defender he is. Is that Jaden's fault? No, Jaden doesn't need to like bulk up to guard Luka Doncic. He's great where he is. It's just a matchup issue. And that to me is like part of this equation as well, that you kind of need to be able to calibrate. A couple more myths I want to bust. There's one thing I will say that's not a myth is like the point guard position, where Reggie was fine in the role that he was tasked with. He really was. Like, ultimately, he wasn't the drain in the playoffs that we kind of thought he would be. Okay, well, hang on. I got to go back here. Dominic says the bench only scored 3 points in Game 7. Dominic, the starters got outscored by 60 points in the series. Do not. Like, we can talk about the bench. I'm okay with talking about the bench leading to what happened with the starters running out of gas. But one, the bench didn't play in Game 7 because it's a Game 7, and you shouldn't expect the bench to play in Game 7. Most teams are going to play their starters 40-plus minutes. That's when you go full Tibbs. 2, the starters were minus 60. Like, I will tell you that. Like, if you want to talk about the bench being the problem for the regular season, not getting the one, or them gassing out, yes, I agree with you. If you want to talk about Game 7, no. Like, that is, and that on the whole Wolves series, the bench is not why they lost. The starters are why they lost. Dominic also says our bench was an Achilles heel all year. Yes, it's true. Except that I would say, like, how could it be the Achilles heel if they won 57 games in the 2 seed? Like, a lot of this, and this is really where Malone does come down, is if we could have gotten 57 wins and rested, we would have done that. But in order for us to be the team that we needed to be, we had to push it to the end. Now, I don't agree with that assessment. I honestly think, and like, if you remember, and this isn't gloating, this is just me trying to show that I'm consistent on this point, because I think it's really important. Because a lot of people were like, no, go for it. They can do it. They're not going to get tired. They never gas out. And I was screaming to the hills, guys, you got to pull back. When they fell back to the 3 seed after the Wolves game, the first Wolves game at the end of the season, I was like, all right, that's it. Pull it. Get rested. It doesn't matter. These games don't matter. The Clippers are not going to catch you for 4. And if they do, so what? You get the Mavericks. You're not worried about OKC. And if you have to go to Minnesota, and I will say, like, this is kind of definitive, right? Why did you want to avoid that situation with Minnesota? Well, you don't want to have to go to Minnesota for a Game 7. Well, you had home court versus Minnesota for Game 7. It didn't matter, which is kind of proof that that's kind of the issue. So that to me is kind of an issue. Most of the teams that have a lot of depth, that are able to mix and match, they don't wind up doing that the further that they go. And you need to think about that Western Conference semifinal series as a Western Conference Finals. Like, that's how serious that Wolves series was. If you play more guys, you genuinely, like, if they played Zeke Naji, that can be the series. You can play in a game in which you're up, but it's not over. Like one of those games, 4 or 5, where it's like still competitive. You play Zeke for 5 minutes and it goes badly. And 1, you've destroyed his confidence forever. And 2, that could seriously cost you the series. Like, that could be it. That's how I've seen this happen. That's how it goes. And more often than not, young players wind up in that situation more often than not. It's very rare that young players do, especially rookies. Second-year guys, I think you can get away with it. But I think that's an issue. Hurricane says, I think they need another backup big. It's preaching to the choir, man. Been saying it for years. Look, everyone's going to say Kelly Olynyk. I'm going to tell you right now, the biggest disaster for I think for my basketball soul was when the Raptors got Kelly Olynyk at the deadline. They're not going to let him go. And if they do, it's going to be for an exorbitant, ridiculously stupid price. Like, the Raptors are just not going to let him go. And that sucks, because Kelly Olynyk would be not only would he be perfect for the Nuggets would be perfect for Kelly Olynyk. Like, he would be seamless and respected and appreciated in Denver for what he brings, because he would be a perfect C to B grade Jokic replacement in the bench unit. It would be perfect in every regard. It won't happen. Finding the right big, I think, is tough. I don't know that you can just have a standard big. Think about how bad the DeAndre Jordan minutes are. And I love DJ, but think about how bad they are. Okay. If let's say that DJ at this point in his career on a 10-point scale is a 3, and you upgrade to like a 5, which is like halfway, and it's fine. That's still, because of the archetype, a net negative, because those types of players are attacked more now with spacing, shooting, and the way guards play. So like Andre Drummond, who had a really great year for sure, still probably is a net negative in a lot of these situations. And I think that's pretty rough. So I think that's kind of an issue. Jeremy says the Nuggets need a rim protector. I don't know how to tell you this. It is not viable to get one, because Jokic is still going to be on the floor for 40 minutes out of most playoff games. And you can't play a pure rim protector next to him. Not one that's notably better than AG. Just can't do it. Just can't do it. So, like, some of this is like, you're just going to have to live with it. Now, you can also say, like, look, and this is kind of the point. They were in game 7 up 20. Did they really need a rim protector? Because they were up in the semifinals in game 7. They were at home up 20. And they win the title if they win that fourth quarter. Like, I'll just tell you that right now. That's my belief, is that they win the title. Gray says net negative on the big, I'll take, just not -8 or whatever. Yeah, that's my problem, though, is it might be like a -4. And that's still pretty bad. You know, I think it's tough. Teledan says Lively still contributing. He's a rookie. Okay. So Derek Lively was drafted 11th. Did the Nuggets have a guy that was drafted 11th there? Teledan? No, they don't. They don't. Like, I'm sorry that there's this idea that you can always find elite players through every portion of the draft because we pick out the outliers. Go back and look at the last 4, just the last 4. Just go look at the last 4 drafts, picks 20 through 45. Go look at those drafts and look at 20 through 45. And look at how many guys are in the NBA playing, contributing, playing big minutes in a playoff series. You're going to find some. You're going to find guys. And you're like, but that guy. Look at the number. It's going to be small. That's the reality. It's tough. All right. That's going to do it for Locked On Nuggets. My thanks for everybody for joining us tonight. Swipe will be with you tomorrow. You'll get his thoughts on everything that's been going on in Nuggets land. I believe we'll be back on World's Finest on Sunday. Adam and I have not been able to match up schedules. We've just had a lot of stuff going on. So we've been able to get to World's Finest. We'll do that on Sunday. We'll start advancing into off-season talk. We'll talk about KCP and more. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Have yourselves a great Friday. Enjoy the weekend. Weather's beautiful here in Denver or wherever you are in the world. Hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you guys again next time. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Nuggets.